Let's talk about why figuring out the most optimal approach to reach your goals is a complete waste of time, or why already knowing the most optimal approach is not enough to reach your goals. We will cover this by discussing, first of all, why you're not just a logical or rational creature, then discussing what actually prompts you to take action, then talking about what creates consistent action, and last but not least, I will share one actionable concrete step that you can take today to start creating that consistency and momentum that will lead to sustainable long-term results. Okay, before we dive into it, subscribe if you want more content on actualizing your full potential. Comment to let me know what topics do you want me to cover. You can check the link in the caption to watch my full strategy coaching session that I gave for free that will help you get unstuck and create momentum. Also, link in the bio, you can check out free discovery call if you want to work with me. And last but not least, a link in the caption also to check out my free newsletter. Okay, now let's dive into it. First of all, you are not just a logical and rational creature. Let's explain it. Besides being a logical and rational creature, you are also psychological and emotional creature. What does this mean? Well, we are way past the point of thinking that you are everything or you are only that which you are aware of. You are only that which you think of yourself. You're only that which happens on the surface level of your consciousness. So we are so far past that point, and we are acknowledging that in almost all aspects of our lives. However, for some reason, in the productivity space, people act as if we are hundreds of years backwards in terms of our understanding of ourselves. And in the productivity space, a lot of people act as if you are only that which you can be aware of when it comes to yourself and your internal processes. Let's make this as simple as possible. You are more complex in terms of your internal dynamics that you will ever be able to comprehend. Now, that can be scary, that can be overwhelming, that can be interesting, that can ignite curiosity. Whatever your initial reaction is, that is the truth. Your internal dynamic or your internal dynamics and everything that is going on inside of you is way more complex than you will ever be able to comprehend, and you can never be fully aware of or fully conscious of all of your drives, urges, and motivations. Okay, let's now fully translate it into the practical field. If you were just a rational or logical creature, or if humans were just rational and logical, no one would be addicted to anything, no one would be binge eating or binge watching anything, no one would be smoking, everyone would be training, everyone would be healthy and productive. How can I make this claim? Well, if you were purely rational and logical, it would mean that insight and information and knowledge translates into action. Well, have you ever seen a person who reads and gets scientific proof that smoking is bad, and upon receiving that information, they stop smoking once and for all and never fight the urge to smoke again, ever again? Did you ever meet that person? Or let's flip it. Do you know people who binge eat? Did you ever binge eat? Did you ever stuff your face, as they say, with so much food that you felt sick? Or did you ever see someone do it? I've done it many times. Well, you know it's not good. Why would you do it? If you were a purely rational and logical creature, you wouldn't do it because you would operate as a you would operate on a mechanical level. Okay, input, I'm receiving input, external input that something is bad, unhealthy, not helpful to my long-term goals and the type of life that I want to live, and therefore I don't do it. Or I receive input and get a proof of the fact that something is healthy, constructive, and conducive to my long-term goals, and therefore I start doing it and I do it consistently. This is not how humans work, okay? There is one famous self-improvement guru that once said, if you want to drop a habit, just read about all the scientific facts that point towards why it's unhealthy. And that is maybe the worst personal growth slash self-improvement advice that I ever heard. It's the lowest level of understanding, or rather not understanding human nature, that I ever read by someone who actually has an insanely large audience. Well, that's the people that we are dealing with, people who have no understanding of how complex human dynamic is, or who don't want to deal with that stuff. They just want to throw out lazy advice out there that sounds cool, but they don't take into account how it can be unhelpful and how it can lead people to disappointment. So that's what we are dealing with. That's what I'm trying to correct, to point out towards our complexity. So if we are psychological and emotional, what does that mean? It means we are way more complex, and we cannot be counting on the fact that external input, scientific facts, most optimal approaches, knowledge, insight, information, we cannot count it, that external input and us processing it on a rational level and understanding it will lead to behavior change. We are way more complex. And there is no single framework on how to actually change your behavior, how to actually resolve a certain habit that you are quote unquote addicted to, or maybe you're truly addicted to something, or something that you're failing to do, but you know it is good for you, and you know that it's healthy and conducive towards your long-term goals. Okay, so now that we explained, hopefully in a clear manner, and made an argument, strong argument, that we are not just rational and logical, we are also psychological and emotional, then we go towards asking, okay, what actually prompts us into action? And the answer is pretty clear. We could say that the initial spark is motivation. And now we have to say, okay, but what is motivation? David, are you telling me that I need to watch motivational reels on Instagram or on TikTok, and that is going to prompt me to action? No. Motivation isn't a category of content. Motivation is a real psychological concept. So motivation is actually something that prompts you into action. Motivation is something that creates movement, something that moves you towards a behavior, something that engages you in a behavior and moves you toward a certain goal. So motivation is a very real concept. I know it's popular to say discipline beats motivation, or you shouldn't rely on motivation. All of that is great. But we have kind of bastardized motivation as this very cheap concept. Motivation doesn't matter. You shouldn't count on motivation. You shouldn't rely on motivation. I understand those arguments. I understand they're often coming from people who want the best for you and who are trying to give helpful advice. But we have to go a few steps back and acknowledge motivation as a real psychological concept that speaks of the internal, hopefully internal, moving force. Now, there is external or extrinsic motivation, which is something that we really shouldn't rely on or shouldn't even pay too much attention to. It is useful short term, but it is not a sustainable type of fuel. It is not sustainable type of long-term fuel to lead you towards goals that take a long time to achieve. So what prompts us into action is motivation. We will go back to it, but now let's say what creates consistent action. And here the situation is a bit more complex, but still, I would say, very clear. What creates consistent action is a combination of intrinsic motivation, enjoyment / fun, meaning, and momentum that results from consistent action. So there is part of consistent action that relies on already having some consistent action. So chicken or the egg type of paradox, but it's not a trap. It's something that we will not have to worry about. Okay, intrinsic motivation. So we have to find what motivates us from within, often related to our values or sense of duty and responsibility, healthy duty and responsibility, voluntarily accepted and embraced duty or responsibility, rather something that seems oppressing, something that seems like a burden. So values, duties, responsibilities, intrinsic motivation, which is the real type of internal sustainable fuel that we want. Extrinsic motivation, as we said, something that we cannot count on as a sustainable long-term fuel. Enjoyment / fun. That is something that we neglect quite often. How enjoyable and fun is the journey? Yes, every journey towards a worthy goal consists of quite a bit of mundane work, quite a bit of boring work, quite a bit of difficult work. But there has to be some level of fun and enjoyment there. You have to sprinkle in some enjoyment and fun. Meaning is tightly related to intrinsic motivation, but I put it separately because I'm pointing towards a narrative of your life. I often talk about viewing your life as a story. Well, this goal that you're moving towards, this habit that you want to adopt, has to fit in some way into the story of your life. That's where meaning comes into play, because it skyrockets. It skyrockets your willingness and your desire and motivation to stick to that habit, to stick to that course of action, and to actually move towards that goal. So, intrinsic motivation, fun/enjoyment, meaning, and then momentum, which creates consistent action but is also a result of consistent action. Momentum as a psychological experience of forward movement, which is progressively more difficult to stop. So forward movement is more and more difficult to stop. As I like to say it, having momentum means that every single day you're finding it more and more difficult to not show up for yourself. And with enough momentum, it is way more difficult to not show up for yourself than it is difficult to face the challenges. So if I'm now on a streak of over 6 years of writing online, I could be facing many challenges, but it's more difficult to not write than it is difficult to face those challenges. I think this is close to 90 consecutive daily YouTube videos. Well, it's becoming way more difficult to not make a daily video than it is difficult to face the challenges and obstacles towards making that video. So we have, once again, intrinsic motivation, enjoyment/fun, meaning, and momentum. That momentum, as you said, don't worry about the paradox, what comes first, consistent action or momentum, because it doesn't matter what comes first. You will start taking small action, it will instantly create some sense of momentum, which will instantly make you more likely to continue taking action. Now, okay, why this type of approach, psychological approach, is better than optimal approach? Because optimal approach doesn't care who you are, doesn't care what your intrinsic motivation is, doesn't care what your context of your life is, doesn't care about what you find fun and enjoyable. Optimal approach never cares about what you find fun and enjoyable. It's all about dry, objective facts, which have no relevance to the context of your life. Psychological approach / emotional approach that I'm presenting to you, approach of creating momentum, puts at the top of the priority list who you are, what motivates you, which will inform us about the course of action that we are taking. It takes into account what you find interesting or enjoyable. It takes into account what is the narrative of your life so that we can fit this into the narrative of your life. A basic example that I can give is my physical training journey. Okay, for over 8 years, I believe, I'm trying now to count, over 8 years, approaching 9-year anniversary, I've been training outside of gym. And I've been consistently training. And I achieved decent or above average results, I would say. Well, I could have, in theory, achieved better results by going to the gym and following the most optimal approach. But who can guarantee that I would train consistently for almost 9 years if I was following the most optimal approach that I don't find fun, that I don't find enjoyable, that I don't find meaningful for me, and that is lacking intrinsic motivation? But if I'm training with kettlebells, which I find super fun, which has an element of intrinsic motivation because I like sustainability and autonomy, and having a kettlebell with which I can train anywhere aligns with my values, well, it's not the most optimal approach to becoming physically fit. It's not the best objective approach, but it's the personally most relevant approach. It's psychologically most compatible approach for me. It's the most authentic approach for me. And that leads to consistent action, because all of these components that we mentioned as necessary components that create consistent action are present. Which means what? Well, I will continue showing up for years and years and years and decades to come, which will inevitably produce results. So the question is, what is better? The most optimal, the objectively best approach that allows you to show up for the next month, 2 months, and then probably you will get tired of it? Or is it better to take the most personally relevant approach that is quote unquote suboptimal in some ways, but will allow you to show up for years and decades to come. Who is going to win? The most optimal person by showing up for the next 3 months in the most optimal way, or the most personally relevant approach that allows the person to show up for the next 15 years? Let's just add a simple question. What will lead to better and more results? Which leads us to the concrete actionable step that you can take today. And that's 30 minutes to journal on or think about what is the most personally relevant approach to your chosen goal or habit or action. Where is the intrinsic motivation? Where is or how to create fun/enjoyment? Where is the meaning? How does it fit into the larger narrative of your life? And then momentum, which will be created by just taking the smallest step possible. Because that small step will signal to you that you're able to take action, which will increase your likelihood of taking action tomorrow. And that's already a streak. It doesn't matter if it's just 2 days in a row, it's already a streak. That's already some amount of psychological momentum. It's the ball starting to roll. And then you have all those components that are necessary for consistent, sustainable, long-term action, which inevitably leads to results. So once again, 30 minutes. Where is the intrinsic motivation? Where is or how to create fun and enjoyment in that specific action or pursuit of that goal? The easiest thing is to consider just one action, like training, writing, reading, playing the guitar, learning a language. Meaning, how does it fit into the larger narrative of your life? And then take the very first, smallest step to get the ball rolling. That's it, friends. As always, stay strong, love life, never feel sorry for yourself, light that raging fire in your heart, and always go beyond. Thank you.